shirts theme song. Nice shirts. Yeah.
Hi, Dave Joly.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. So you are someone who's been through almost all forms of digital art and animation, from the very first computer animations before there was the ability to use any kind of clicking pixels and having to code it, all the way to now, because now it's now.
Right. That makes me old. Right.
No, that makes you wise, sage.
No, it just makes me old. But anyway, yeah, you're right. I started back at Atari in the early 80s, so pixels were this big, and doing games for the VCS, the 2600 game system back then. And then eventually got out of doing games because I wasn't that happy with the quality of the imagery that you could do at that time in the early 80s.
You weren't happy with 16 different squares to choose from?
16 was just before I left. Most of the time I was there was 8. So,
Okay.
Yeah, it was like the Crayola 8 crayon box. In school, I was an illustration major, so I was used to working, analog. When I was in school back in those old days, there were no, at that time, home computers weren't really a thing yet. So I had no experience on a computer, and I was just looking to be a freelance. Well, actually, I was looking to get a job as an illustrator in a studio, and I had applied to Hallmark and some studios. I went to school in Boston, so I had applied to some studios in Boston, and really was gunning for a job at Hallmark, because not that I was real keen on Hallmark sentiment, but at the time they were the kind of one of the preeminent studios in the country for illustrators. And what I wanted to do was learn as much as I could in 3 or 4 years, and then go out on my own as a freelancer. I had an instructor who said, "Oh, I think you'd be great, and I think they're really gonna, go for you." And I was all revved up and got a nice letter back that said, thanks, but no thanks. And I was kind of crushed, but this was right after I had graduated, and decided to take a bicycle trip across country. I lived in Connecticut. I wanted to go to California. And I had never really traveled much outside of New England, New York area. So packed up my bicycle and some slides of my work and headed out to the West Coast.
It's like a sober version of On the Road by Jack Kerouac.
Yeah, I was imagining that when I got to California, I would start showing my work around and get a job. And I only made it as far as Ohio, and I was really burnt out on the whole solo bike adventure at that point. I had done a lot of bicycle touring, but it had always been with friends. So I decided, I came back, tail between my legs, and found a job at a silkscreen, a t-shirt silkscreen place in Cape Ann or Gloucester, Mass, outside of north of Boston. So I just started working there as half the time I was actually pulling silk screens, and the other half of the time I was in the design department. So, it was a job. I started getting paid. And out of the blue, one day I came home from work, and I had a phone call. I had a message, and it was somebody that said, "I'm so-and-so from Atari, and I'm wondering if you'd be interested in coming out for an interview." And first of all, I barely had an idea of what Atari was at the time, and I had no idea how somebody from out there would know who I was. It turned out that I had an instructor at college who I had gone and cried on her shoulder when I came back from my bike trip. And, woe is me. And she had a friend at a design firm in Palo Alto, south of San Francisco, and she sent some of my work out there, and it got passed around, and somebody from Atari happened to see it. And so that person called me up, and eventually I got a flown out to Atari in Sunnyvale, and I figured I would never be able to get a job there, but I loved getting a free trip to California. So I thought I pretty much won the lottery with that. And turns out a couple of weeks later, they offered me a job. So boom, next thing I know, I had never touched a computer to that point. And all of a sudden I'm sitting in front of an Atari 800 and starting to figure out how to push pixels around.
You mentioned before that they had figured out someone had created a program in order for you to paint in the images.
Right. A guy named Dave Toyer in the coin-op division of Atari, his wife was the manager of our division in the VCS games division. And he wrote a program for her, and consequently for the rest of us, where you could use a joystick, the Atari joystick with the fire button, and you could position pixels by moving the joystick. And then when it was in the position that you wanted, you hit the fire button and it put the pixel down. And then you could pick, one of 8 colors to put on your pixel. So that was cutting edge at that point, because everybody else in other companies were actually still using hex code to, they would color in squares on graph paper and then break it into hex code and then hand that to the programmer, and then you'd see it up on the screen. So it was that was space age, what we were using at that time.
Did you ever have nightmares in hex code?
No, luckily I didn't have to do it at Atari. I was only told, I didn't even know what it was. They told me, well, you're living large because you're able to use this software. But before you had this, we were doing hex code. It wasn't until I actually went to my next job, which was at Coleco in West Hartford, and found out that they were using graph paper still in hex code. So that's when my nightmare started.
So when you were doing on Atari, so you said you had the joystick, and were you how did you get from sketch? Or were you just drawing on the screen, or did you use a graph paper to kind of map out where the pixels would go?
Right. Good question. Yeah, sometimes we did. I happened to be, when I was at Atari, I was working on a lot of licensed games for Disney and the Muppets, and characters, Asterisk and Obelix, that were big in Europe. So because they were licensed characters, they really had to be on as you could be with, 8 pixels or 16. So so we would plot it out, do a sketch, and sort of break it into squares, and then run it by somebody for an okay, and then do it on screen.
I love the idea of being on model and someone at corporate review is going through the branding and it's 8 squares. How do you?
Right. Well, it's surprising. There was a guy at Disney. We had quite a few trips down to Disney Studio, which was an amazing thing. I had grown up, like a lot of kids, I had grown up wanting to work for Disney, as a kid. And all of a sudden I found myself at 22 years old doing trips down to Disney Studio to meet with the guy at the studio who was in charge of meeting with us to talk about the games. And he was a fabulous artist, and he had worked for Disney for a long, long time in their merchandising. He used to do comics for them and all kinds of stuff. So he was quite good at interpreting, this really low resolution stuff and what it would take to meet their requirements, for the look of the characters. But still, that's for the title screen. When it came to, Mickey or a broomstick for Sorcerer's Apprentice and that kind of stuff, is really, you have to be told it's Mickey when you see that thing, in 8 pixels.
We should probably tell everyone you had nothing to do with ET.
Nothing to do with ET. My roommate did the graphics for ET. And that was quite an adventure. It was pretty neat at that time. The guy that programmed it, Howard Warshaw, was a real star of programmer. He's pretty much a genius in that venue. And even though, a lot of stories have been written about how terrible the game was and it brought down the industry and all that kind of stuff, he did kind of a remarkable job getting that thing together in the short amount of time. I think he had 6 weeks. The normal development time was about six months. And Spielberg actually came to Atari and met with Howard. And he said, yeah, I can do that. Of course, he drove a hard bargain and he got quite a few perks once he handed it in, but he did get it in on time. It just so happened that there were a lot of events at that point in the industry. This was like 83, I think, or 82, Christmas of 82, I think it was when it came out. And so I don't think the game itself was the thing that crashed the industry, but it helped.
I got 2 questions for you. One is that, do you still remember the conversation when they see your art, your work? And then, how that, do you remember what is your feature or your personality that they feel, we want to bring you in, even though you don't know what Atari is what they do at that time? And also another is your illustration major and how it links to animation.
Good questions. I think the thing that attracted them in seeing my portfolio, which was all illustration, I had a strong kind of animated style, even though it wasn't animation. I had a very whimsical style, and I was interested in, because I had grown up super interested in animation, although they didn't have animation at my college, my art school. At the time, this was the late 70s. I still had that kind of feel for that kind of drawing, and I was very interested in that. So I had a lot of pieces that had that whimsical feel to it, very colorful and animated feeling. So I think that attracted them to call me. And then when I got out there, I think it was a matter of, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I was willing to try anything. So I think my enthusiasm probably sealed the deal, and I think I came off as somebody who might be easy to work with.
You mentioned they were very free form company.
Oh yeah, it spoiled me for the rest of my life. I have freelanced. Let's see, I was at Atari for a couple of years, and then I was at Coleco for a bit, and then another software company for a year. And so I've been freelancing since about middle of 84. And Atari was the closest thing to the feeling of freelancing, where you really did have complete freedom as to when you came in to work. Some programmers were working, they were just night owls, and they'd come in at 7 o'clock at night and leave who knows when, the next morning. And I was kind of an early riser, so I'd go in pretty early and leave on the early side of the afternoon. And it didn't matter as long as you got the work done. And the graphics people would work directly with a programmer on whatever game you were working on. So as long as you were meshing with them, and this is obviously all well before, this was long before the internet, so you actually did have to see people. But as long as you were meeting their needs, nobody said a word. It was the greatest feeling to work in a place that you totally trusted to get the work done. And it worked out.
I remember being a kid and we first got colors on, you put in the floppy and you boot it up and you can pick colors and paint them. If you did certain combos, the edges would overlap and give you all kinds of weird distortions. Yeah. Were there any weird or strange rules when you were painting to like, okay, these colors can only be by these ones or anything like that?
No, it was only, it was so limited that I don't recall that really ever being a problem. Maybe I was lucky, but you wouldn't know what it was going to really look like until the programmer put it up on the screen, because you'd be working on characters separate generally from the background colors that you were going to be using. It wasn't like you were working on a character on top of the background. these were all separate little stamps that you were creating for the different steps of the animation. So you really didn't get a look at it in the game until the programmer actually incorporated the code that the software that we were using generated for the programmer. And you'd get a look. And then, if something was really off or clashing or creating artifacts, you just say, hey, maybe this needs to be darker or something like that. But it really, it was so long ago. It was like you didn't have a lot of control. So you kind of relied on the programmer a lot. They were the ones who really, they were doing the graphics before we ever showed up. And the only reason Atari hired specific graphics people or animators, animators was kind of in quotes, but the only reason they hired us is because it was either Imagic or Activision had started with programmers that had left Atari and started a competing company, and they hired graphic artists. So their graphics were looking better than Atari. So Atari, in reaction, started hiring graphic artists.
Necessity of spite.
Yeah, it really was. What was interesting too is we didn't. There were 5 of us in this group, this home games group, and we didn't really interface much at all with the packaging people. And the box art that the games would come in always attracted me because coming from an illustration background, oh man, some of this stuff was really beautiful. The game art, and there were some illustrators that worked in packaging that I really admired. And I kind of secretly wished, man, I wish I could do, a box art for some of these games and really make some nice images. And at the same time, there were a lot of folks over there that were wishing they were doing, what we were doing because it was something new and fun and all this kind of stuff. So it was pretty neat. And there was one person who called me up one day from the marketing division and said, hey, can I come over and use this kind of special drawing system that they had bought for us graphics people to play with? Believe it or not, it wasn't even something we were going to be using for the games, but there was a lot of money sloshing around, so they invested it into this system. And this guy had heard about it and came over to use it. He called me up, asked me, can I come over and play with this thing? And I said, sure, no problem. And it turns out that he was a guy named Russell Brown, and eventually he moved on to Adobe and became kind of an evangelist for Photoshop back when Photoshop was in version 2 maybe. So I don't know if he's still with Adobe, but he's worked for them for decades, and he kind of like got his teeth into it using this system when he was at Atari working in the marketing department.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So you were doing some of the first sprites ever exist.
Yeah, I didn't. They didn't even the programmers would talk about sprites, but none of us graphics people really were technical. We had no background in the terminology and any of that stuff. So that was all picked up on the side. And the programmers were great because they were pretty understanding about our lack of technical knowledge. But then again, there wasn't that much technical knowledge that around at the time. So it's kind of similar to if I started using Photoshop back in, I don't know, 93 or 4 or something like that, and the manual was like half an inch thick. And now if it was printed, it's not printed anymore, but it would be a foot and a half. So one of those things. It's nice to get in on the ground floor. You don't feel quite so dumb.
So you were an illustrator, now making sprites. And did you have to do walk cycles? And if so, where did you learn walk cycles?
That's a good question. We would use kind of classic cartoons. VC, believe it or not, this is how long ago this was. VCRs were new. And the one that they bought for our department I think at the time, I think it cost something like $1,200.
In 1980s money.
Yeah. So, we would just try to frame by frame through, classic cartoons. We also used Muybridge, Edward Muybridge, who was a photographer from the 1800s, 1880s. He came out with a big series of human and animal locomotion, and they're still images, photographs. Fu, you're probably familiar with those. So we would use those as reference because it was great. They were broken down into still frames. There were no motion cameras at that point when he was shooting. So he was just creating this series of images by tripping wires as, the horse is walking across, the scene. So anyway, that was an aid that we used a lot. So between that and we did have a Polaroid camera, and we'd try to shoot our own stills if we needed that. But, to think back on how rudimentary that was, compared to now, it's just incredible.
It's a lot of self-taught, and I feel like it's one people sharing their experience to the other, more for their information to the other.
Yeah, what's interesting too is the people that I worked with in that group, the five of us, we all had vastly different kind of backgrounds. A couple of them were illustrators too, but had worked in different ways. One was an exhibit designer. That was Jerome, my roommate, who worked on ET. He came to it from a design exhibit design background. So, really vastly different backgrounds that it made an interesting group of people and experiences.
But that's kind of a staple of your whole career, right? So on and off, you've been at the forefront of technology. Whether you stuck with whatever it was or not, you have always tested the newest thing from 1982 to now, where you keep trying and dabbling in new mediums.
In retrospect, that's what it feels like. But I never felt it wasn't ever strategic, that like I'm gonna keep myself on the forefront of this or that.
Right.
I don't necessarily feel like I am or have been in the forefront of anything just because, I'm finding out about this stuff the same time everybody else is. But I think the one thing that maybe has suited me over the decades is that I have always maintained a kind of excitement about the new things that were coming down the pipe, and it's like playing with toys. I love to play with toys, and finding new ways of doing animation or new media, that kind of stuff. It's always just been fun to me. So when it kind of came across my radar, the other way to think of it is the new, the shiny thing that immediately grabs my attention.
But you've not only have you always tried the new stuff, like you've never been averse to it, but you also have always been involved in teaching it or taking it in. Like you mentioned an online group called Pixel Core or something like that, right, as well.
Yeah. That was something I think it was 2004 when somehow I happened to see something, an email or something. Email was still kind of new, and it sounded interesting. There was a guy, Alex Lindsay, out in the West Coast, who was putting this graphics group together. This is before Facebook or social media or that stuff, and I had been illustrating for quite a long time at that point, and once I left Atari, and I was just doing analog magazine and advertising illustration, and knowing at some point as computers developed, I'd probably get back onto a computer to do my work. And then when Photoshop came in and Illustrator and so on, I kind of gradually went from analog, starting to add digital, and then went completely to digital, knowing also that was going to bring me to a point when I'd be able to do animation, kind of high quality animation eventually. So it was kind of a flow. So by 2004, I had been freelancing for quite a long time, and I work in my house in the attic, and it can be kind of takes you out of circulation quite a bit. So I thought an online group of people who were interested in the same kind of stuff I was might be kind of fun. It was people all over the world who have expertise in one thing, teaching their expertise to the other folks who have expertise in something else, but want to learn what you know. So it's not a really nice back and forth, organic, give and take. Learned a lot of video stuff, particularly through that, and also that was my introduction to 3D animation. Cinema 4D, I think, is specifically.
Was that your Cinema 4D the first software you used for 3D?
I think I used something called Bryce.
Bryce.
It was essentially a that was before. I think that was the late 90s. I was using that Bryce 3D, I think it was, and it was primarily about generating landscapes, and it had basic primitive shapes that you could add to it. But it was really about. I think it was called Bryce because the programmer was kind of taken with Bryce Canyon. So this was something that I was fooling around with, again, just because it seemed so cool, and it was so far afield from anything I had done before. Other than that, I had not done any 3D stuff, and it was still at that point this was the late 90s. It was still actually hard to get a computer that could generate a 3D image, in less than half an hour. Then through the Pixel Core, I became familiar with Cinema 4D and used that quite a bit.
Oh, I didn't know Cinema 4D appears that early. I know too.
Yeah. And I think I started with it in 2004 or 5, and I think it was up to version 7, I think, by then. So it had been around for quite a while.
So it's 22 years after you were at Atari using a joystick. You're in version whatever of Cinema 4D, and even that now was 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, it's I feel like when I was it's Cro-Magnon period when I was at Atari. It feels that long ago. Just thinking about life before email, forget about social media. Just before email or the internet. I was an illustrator for quite a long time, where even using FedEx and a fax machine. I remember the first fax machine I got. My wife and I were living outside of Boston, and she was also an illustrator, and a lot of our work was coming from the Boston market. And when we moved to Connecticut, Northeast Connecticut, it's like 70 miles from Boston. And when we were living outside of Boston, we would go in to see art directors, both to show your work, and then when you got a job, you'd go in to show the sketch, and then you'd go home, do the finish, go back to present the finish. It was all face to face. So when we moved to Northern Connecticut, it was like, I think we should get a fax machine. And it was like, gulp, a fax machine. And I think the fax machine was like $1,500. And so it was a big deal. I had to call an art director. We got the box, we got the fax machine, and I had never used one before. So I had to call an art director. I didn't have a job. I just called the art director and said, "Can I send you a fax?" Just to see how it worked. So we were doing FedEx and fax machines for quite a long time before email came around. And then obviously, then it became sending sketches via email, and then the job through FedEx. And then eventually you sent the job electronically too. So the only downside to that was back when it was analog and there was no internet, you got the job and you had a week to do, often you had a week to do a sketch, and then you'd have a week or two to do the finish illustration. And then when email came around and digital delivery and that kind of stuff, all the deadlines became compressed. So, you were working oftentimes on much shorter deadlines. And it allowed the art director to feel like they could request changes much more often in the process.
The communication gets more easier, but I don't understand about the timeline, like the shorten why they think it can be.
Yeah, well, that's that was always a topic of discussion when illustrators would get together about, well, I remember the old days when, you had a week or you had 2 weeks, something like that. But that's the market.
How do you feel about now the internet, the social media? How's your experience? How do you feel?
Mixed.
Mixed feelings?
Well, I mean, obviously the web and all that stuff it's fantastic. It's unbelievable. As social media, I wasn't that crazy about Facebook, for the usual obvious complaints that people have with that. I see value in it. It all depends. Instagram was kind of a different story. Once the Pixel Core, that online graphics group, ended, which was for most people, I think, same as me, around the 2008 or 9, somewhere around there. I didn't do social media at all. Facebook was pretty new at that point. And then I tried Facebook for a little bit and got off in about a year. I got on Instagram about 3 years ago, only because I had read a book that my wife had called Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. And I always enjoyed showing work when I was in the Pixel Core. And I particularly I love to watch on YouTube or Instagram or whatever. I love behind the scenes stuff. I love to see how artists do their thing. And I always enjoyed in the Pixel Core putting together presentations about projects, how this was done and all the process stuff. I just like organizing. For some reason, I like organizing information that way. When I read the book about Show Your Work, and he was advocating showing your process and just putting it out there for people to see, and you comment on theirs, and it's a sharing thing. And that reminded me of my Pixel Core experience. So I decided, I'll give it a shot, this Instagram thing. And I just found that I really enjoyed finding this kind of endless group of people that, you'd see their process, you'd see their finished stuff. They talk about their work and their inspirations and all the trials and tribulations and all that stuff. And particularly that it was kind of very short form. And I didn't really have or hadn't seen to that point a venue for short form stuff, just tests and walk cycle, any of that kind of stuff, whether it was finished or halfway or whatever. So I really enjoyed that. And so I started putting stuff up. And so I got to say that I have enjoyed my experience on Instagram for the most part. I know all the downside. Well, I know most of the downsides to Instagram. But fortunately, it seems like the group of people that I happen to see a lot of, I really enjoy.
I wonder if on the Pixel Forum, some are appearing on Instagram, like you guys can you connect again.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't run into anyone that I actually worked with or was, at these various places when I was there. But I've always wondered if I'm going to bump into some folks that way. I don't know. The ranks are getting thinner and thinner. We're getting so much older now. So there may be a lot of people that don't even, do this stuff at this point.
I don't know. Imagine, I in my head, just all these, because you're not there yet, but people who eventually get to their 80s and they're in retirement homes, whatever, and they're still just have a little animation club making their shorts together.
I've actually thought of that. I thought, gee, if I have to go into a home, if I just have an iPad and I'm able to, do stuff on the iPad, I think I'll be okay.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah.
Hopefully it won't be for a while, but we'll see.
Yeah, I want to thank you for show your work on Instagram, because that's how we met you and how we appreciate your work. And I wonder, is that animation wildcard? How do you met this community?
I think it just popped up, in the feed. I think that's where I may have. Well, I think you and Johnny popped up separately, but I think a lot of people that have popped up in the feed I saw an animation wildcard. I think at one point I had sent a message or maybe commented on, one of the editions of Animation Wildcard, and Lex or Cassie or somebody, commented back, and I thought, wow, this seems like fun. I'd like to try. Think I'd like to try doing this sometime, because it seemed like a great venue for short form stuff. And I don't think I quite have the attention span or stamina or something to think about an extensive solo film spanning more than 5 minutes. But I think really well in 1 minute or 30-second chunks.
Yes.
Hey, for solo animator, 30 seconds to a minute, that's solid.
Yeah, I know. That's something I try to talk to the students about, to give them, by the time they get out of my class, I think I try to give them an appreciation for when they watch an animated film or short or something, an idea of the work that goes into it. And when you see, on a big production, those credits roll at the end, that it's a huge undertaking. And just giving them that experience of doing, a 30-second little short in my class, and they're the only one working on it. I think they really get an appreciation for what goes into these incredible films that they see.
Speaking of incredible 30-second to 1 minute animations, let's talk about some of yours. You decided, as always in nature of you, to just learn something completely new when the pandemic started.
Right. Yeah. At that point, I had heard about Blender, and it was free. So how can you?
Yeah.
So I decided to give it a shot, and I'm a big one for taking courses online, and I found a great introductory course to Blender, CG Boost. I really appreciated the way he structured his course. It was so comprehensive, and he hit all the critical points. So it was a great introduction to Blender. One thing I've found through the years when I do some kind of course is I get much more inspired in the course. If you're going to create something, rather than create it the way the instructor is creating it, I try to personalize it to some degree. So I was able to do that in that CG Boost thing, to turn it into something that evolved into something that made sense to me and was kind of fun.
Yeah, yes, that's the thing. I'm so happy you mentioned about it, because I do know that course, and I admire that you finished that course, because I didn't finish it. And I do see some students' work as well. Like everyone might can have different cards, like kind of different style, but the photo, the camera movement and things is very cool. You can learn from the film concept in the class. But what I love is like your film, you created into a film, and it's called Chalk's Acne Deliveries. Yeah, and I love you linked your personal story and what your relatives or you used to have. And yes, the camera cut, the music, like it's totally become your whole, it become your thing. If I don't know the class, I have no idea. And I just thought, wow, like you created a film basically.
Well, that's what it felt like. Although, I did use a lot of the suggested camera moves and that kind of stuff in the course in learning it, but I combined back when I was at Atari, I had a chance to meet Chuck Jones, who was the famous Warner Brothers cartoon director. That was a real highlight of my life, actually. So I got to talk to him for a while, and that's always hovering around in my head. And my brother happened to have an old Renault car from the late 50s. So I combined kind of those two things into Chuck's Acme Delivery. It's fun to pull those things out of your experience and kind of mash them into something. You don't necessarily know how it's going to come out, but it's a blast to, see at the end.
Yeah.
I like the film was a success, but you still made a literal car wreck at the end anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that was fun. And the Roadrunner rock formation.
Hmm.
That was a fun idea to stumble upon.
I wonder, like, I feel you if you are your position is as a student, you are a great student, and how do you put that suggestions to share with your students? Like, you can while you're doing the assignment, you can develop it to your own. Like, just share more a little bit about yourself. How do you lead them to that direction?
I tell them exactly that.
Huh? Yeah.
I tell them you'll have a much better time in this class if you actually invest yourself in it. And I use my own experience to say I've done a lot of learning, and it's drudgery if you don't feel like you're invested in it yourself. So, I find different sections of books, inspirational, quotes, whatever, to try to inspire them to have fun and pull something out of themselves that I'm sure you both know that if you suddenly if you feel you see or you hear yourself in your work, it's an epiphany. It's like, this is the reason I am here.
Yeah, especially you need to spend time on it. So
Yep.
why not just record that life, that lifetime of yourself into the work too?
Yeah.
Let's say you're starting something new. So you already have so many new things that you can't have a process for yet because you haven't tried it yet. So is there anything else you do to give yourself a concrete foundation?
It sort of depends whether I'm just experimenting or if it's something for a job. And if it's for a job, you have to kind of rein yourself in and not be, or at least I can't be too experimental.
You say that, but we're going to get you in trouble in a minute for, I know you didn't do it.
Anyway, that's generally what I tell people is that, I try not to experiment on the client's dime. Hopefully in a client situation, I know what I'm going to do. And I'm pretty confident because I've done it a bunch of times. And then the personal stuff and most of the stuff that I show on Instagram, it's just playful. My wife is a fantastic painter, and she's also an illustrator. And the thing about her work that I always admired and was kind of jealous of is that she has this stream of consciousness thing going on. And I felt that a lot of the stuff that I was doing like 15 or 20 years ago was, again, because I was doing a tremendous amount of client work, and because I was confident in my style and the procedure, I was doing it kind of over and over and over again. And I felt like I couldn't break out of that. And to see her, do these fantastic stream of consciousness things that evolved organically, I really admired that and was jealous. So over time, I have tried to become more like that. So to get back to your question, a lot of times I will not necessarily have a plan. And it's like you just take Legos and you start putting them together and you go, oh, that kind of looks like this. And maybe that'll go over here. And there was a book I remember, a children's book I remember reading that we had. It was about a British beekeeper by a guy named Kit Williams. And that was the author illustrator. And I remember reading a blurb about his process. He was an exquisite craftsman as well as illustrator. And he said he had been taught that by an old craftsman, the key was just to make sure each subsequent part fits. And you just keep building and it all fits. And then when you have the big thing, it all fits,
Wow.
and it, like anything, it could be trash in the end, but it's your trash. But it all fits really well. So I kind of tried to have that sense that I'm just trying to make things fit. And hopefully I channel some of what my wife has going on, and I'll put something in a certain spot and go, wow, blue. It just helps to keep the excitement going.
Yeah.
And I try not to take that stuff too seriously. For the most part, it helps feed, that thing that I know you both know of, where you're just addicted to the flow. You're just always trying to get into the flow. And so for me, that helps me do it. And hopefully, if you get a job that comes in, you can grab part of that and shove it into the job and get paid on the other end, and everybody's happy.
Do you find it helps to make comedic things in order to not take it so seriously so you can have more fun with it? Like Red vs. Blue that you did. It is a funny thing overall, but it looked like you were also working on a lot of other technical things for the claymation, because you had I don't know, they look like the old school weights that would drop on top of Wile E. Coyote. Once again, maybe Chuck Jones is your spirit animal, but you were they had these dingle kind of heads that you seemed to be doing a real movement, and it looked like you were really focusing on that aspect in that short to learn with, but not learn. It looked great. Very clear.
Well, actually, it's a good point. The genesis of that was I took a class, an online course from Kevin Perry, who's a stop motion animator that a lot of people know. He does incredible stuff. I think that was just after my pandemic Blender thing. I did a pandemic stop motion thing with his class. That project was about overlapping action. I think the specs for the project were just have a block of clay with this, little appendage on the top, and make these two things interact.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. It's not only overlapping. It got a lot of tick on the check on the principles, like weight.
Yeah, anticipation and all that.
Yeah, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the thing. I was trying. When I talk to students, we start my class. We start with very basic, the usual basics of anticipation, squash and stretch, all that stuff that everybody knows about. And I say, look, the idea is not that you learn this thing in this project and then you forget about it, because we're going to be learning about this principle.
Mm-hmm.
Take that one that we had last week, bring it into this one, learn this one, and then take those two and bring it into the next one, and keep building on it. And that was the same thing with that short, where I was trying to get as much of the basics in there, and make it sort of play like a film.
But you still made it funny. Is that something that do you like to just have more of a comedic tone to things in general, or is that
absolutely okay? Even though I don't come off, I'm sure right now, as being a very fun guy, but
disagree. I think you're hilarious.
I've always, even when I was an illustrator, I've always kind of gone towards the comedic or whimsical or whatever. I often think of myself as like an entertainer as opposed to, an illustrator or an animator. I think it's really fun to think that someone could enjoy something or get a laugh out of something that I get a laugh out of. That's another thing. See, my wife's work, Annie Joly, if you want to look her up, she's a terrific painter. Her work is not comedy, or, she has some very whimsical stuff that's terrific. Children's book oriented stuff. I've gone through periods. We've been married for a long time, like 38 years. So I've gone through periods. It's fantastic being married to an artist, as Fu knows. But sometimes you kind of get a little jealous about what they're able to do, or get influenced, or both. And sometimes I feel like, wow, she has work that's like serious, like
have artist statement and with a lot of meaning in it, kind of thing.
Well, not the ones that you don't understand, but the ones that you do understand. She has the ability to deal with a lot of internal feelings and emotions and that kind of stuff. And boy, I don't. but I I always just find myself attracted to, things that make me laugh, because, if you're not laughing, you're crying a lot. So, uh, that's just the stuff that attracts me. And as I really appreciate what she's able to do, but she's her and I'm me. And,
Yeah.
at least she tells me when it should be red instead of blue, like that's really helpful.
Yeah, I would love to share with you how when I see your work, it's like not only illustration but also the animation. Like I want to talk about the colors, like the color palette you use. There are a lot of really excited and saturated, and you can kind of like also complementary colors, background and the character, and also like how you design your character, that the proportion. It has certain kind of shape. I feel I can tell, oh yeah, that's they word. And also like a lot of creatures are very magical. Sometimes they are very great to be like a hand puppet. Like again, it's the proportion and the face and how they react. Like, can you talk more about those?
Your evaluation of my work that you just went through is the most extensive evaluation that I have ever heard of.
Really?
I do. I have a really hard time doing that, of looking at my whatever I do and seeing it as a body of work, and it has this quality and it has that quality. I've often thought that I have a designer friend that I worked with for many years, and he's got a great eye, and I've often thought, man, I ought to just like ask him, what am I? Who am I? Tell me what you see in this stuff, because I kind of like go from thing to thing to thing, I guess in a certain way. And as you said, it has a certain look to it, but I have a hard time seeing, that coherence. It's not necessarily a strategic
Yeah.
thing, or that I had some great insight that said, man, I'm going to be the guy who makes, fat characters, something like that, even though I spent a lot of years making people that looked like my dad. So it's just kind of like stuff that comes out. And I don't pretend to, have some remarkable insight into why I do what I do, and why I choose the colors that I choose. I was never good with color.
Really?
Oh,
Are
in
you joking?
art school, yeah. Again, being married to my wife has really upped my color game over the decades. So I'm indebted again to her for that. So hate to disappoint, but I just do what I do, and it comes out in certain ways.
Subconsciously, but you definitely have your own universe, like, and then it just showed. And I believe like some clients, some of the latest commercial work you do, like energy water,
G
yeah,
Fuel.
G Fuel, yeah. I feel it is of your style and how you can accomplish. That's why they look for you, right? How do you like? How's these leads coming in, and how is the process?
Well, that series in particular, they requested a stop motion feel,
Hmm.
and and I hadn't done really a lot of stop motion. I really that Kevin Perry class that I took in 2020 was kind of the start. I had always wanted to do it, but I never had software for it, and so I bought Dragon Frame and started using it, and then I saw the course and started playing kind of extensively with it. But I didn't have a lot of experience with it prior to that. And then when this job came in, actually from the art director seeing some of the stuff that I had posted on Instagram, and they said, hey, we'd like to do some kind of like stop motion thing. And I said, fine, no problem. Even though I didn't have my process down, I figured I could come up with something. That's kind of how that started. When you do something for decades, what I found is the thing about making an illustration or an animation, it's like tens of thousands of decisions that you make even if you're not conscious at the time that you're constantly making decisions. And I found that because I've been doing the work for so long, I've gotten faster at making decisions. Or actually, I've gotten faster at being confident in making the decision. Because I used to not be confident. I'd still have to make the same number of decisions, but it took me 5 times as long because I was sweating over every one. So I think it's a function of just when you've been doing it for a long time, or the more, it's like anything, the more practice you get, the more confidence you gain. And when you keep doing it over and over and over again, you no longer, it's not like you have to beat your head against the wall to get the process going. It's just a natural flow. You forget about time, and you're just totally into it. The muse is out here funneling all this stuff through you, and you just, oh yeah, this is great. But I think for the average person, and I've always thought, if there's anybody that's average, it's me. It's about doing it over and over and over again and trying to stay inspired however you can to continue to do it over and over and over again. And it's in that repeat process that it's like a seed, growing. It just grows and grows and grows, and your abilities, you build on all that, and just through repetition you become more comfortable with who you are. And then at times when you become uncomfortable of who you've become, hopefully you have enough energy left to sort of break out in some manner, or the shiny thing over there looks like the thing to go after, so you can leave all this stuff behind. So it's just some kind of organic process that if you can just stay at it long enough, it's like playing the violin, I guess. I don't play the violin, but I imagine that if you can just get past being 7 years old and having your mom tell you that it's time for your violin lesson, at some point there's something that hits and generates a little energy from within, and you pursue it.
Yeah, that's precious. Johnny, I believe you, about the flow and the repetition and practice, you must have a lot of reflections on this too.
I mean, I feel like you summarized it really well. I mean, it's kind of one of those, if you do something enough, you're not, here's an example. So I have been editing some of our last couple podcasts, and I stare at the shot over and over, go like, can I take that word out? Or should I not take that word? Where it's just, if I'm writing music, I know what's important and what's not. Like, so it's like the beginning stages when you're writing, it just flies by quickly. Whereas when it's something new, you are panicking over every little thing, the minutia that really doesn't matter.
Yep, absolutely. And there's just no way, I think there's no way around it yet anyway, because they can't put the chip in. There's just no way around it other than to just do it over and over and over again. And you just develop a confidence. That's one of those lessons that I try to remember in my class when I teach. That's the thing I try to tell them. At this point, I tell my students, look, anything I'm going to tell you, you can learn on the web. The only purpose for me being and standing in front of you, or virtually or whatever, is to give you the benefit of my experience to try to help you gain that confidence, because all the technical things you can pick up anywhere.
That's amazing. Like you also set an example, because you are execute as you share with them what you can do. As being a student yourself, you can try to generate as more thing and links to everything you learn from, and then put into a small, like a few seconds, but it got everything. Like it can be very sophisticated work. Yeah, everything can show. I'm glad if they can get what you're saying.
That makes 2 of us. Yeah.
Yeah. You also mentioned about like because you take the stop motion animation course and you got inspired, and then you also put that into your animation course, like by just let them using hands and try to feel the timing and spacing. Can you explain?
Yeah. Actually, when I saw the Kevin Perry class, I remembered that for a long time I had wanted to use stop motion But up until, relatively recently, when everybody has a cell phone, there was always the technical bottleneck of the school having to have webcams at each station, and you couldn't leave a set up and all that. So it seemed the teaching situation that I was in just wouldn't accommodate that very well. So during the pandemic, I saw his course, I took the course, and by that time I realized, man, everybody's got a phone, and Stop Motion Studio app on the phone works great, and a lot of people use that as an entry point into doing stop motion. So I thought, well, that's taken care of. Also, in 2020 there were no on-ground classes. It was all going to be virtual. So I thought, this is the time to revamp my class to have a section of stop motion. So we start off with a month of stop motion, primarily because there's practically no technical hurdle, and you can just concentrate on those basics. And it to me, it takes a lot of the clutter of the learning software out, so you can just focus on the important stuff: timing, spacing,
Movement.
Yes. So hopefully, when we finish after a month of that, then we go into Adobe Animate and doing 2D digital animation. Again, they're going to hopefully carry what they learned over there into this. So that's how doing a stop motion portion of the class came into being.
I love, forget, you said it before to us. It was, you got into stop motion because you were impatient for waiting for software to start up.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too about it was, again, I would look at my wife, and she does a lot of traditional paintings, brush on paper, and it's immediate. Boom. And I always felt like, again, a lot of the stuff that I was doing, oh man, there's some pre-planning, and there's a routine that I go through, and it didn't feel as immediate, especially with animation, because there's so much involved with setting up an animation. But because stop motion, I was able to start working with my hands again, making things, which I really enjoy. Just pushing clay around and making puppets and that kind of stuff. That felt like crafty and different than so much of the stuff that I had done for work or digitally before. So even though stop motion is so slow, doing the hands-on stuff felt like I connected to my work again in a different way. And that got me excited again. I'm always looking for a hook, some way to get hooked into something. And it was playing with, dolls or clay stuff. And then just, even a few frames, seeing it move. That's enough to get me going.
That might be the best explanation of Dave Joly as a person, is you're comfortable being uncomfortable with something new and just trying new things just to play.
I'm going to write that down. Between the two of you, I now know who I am.
Oh no! I feel so humble about that. No. Also, because in one of your work, called Midnight Snack in the animation wildcard episode, that is after you do the timing is after you do the commercial G Fuel multiple one, right? And then you use similar very cool technique on your Midnight Snack too. And from last time you share the cleanliness, the neatness, and combine 2D, and I felt that is so cool. Can you share with us that?
Yeah, so the G Fuel series of things, I said that they hired me to do the stop motion stuff, and I didn't necessarily have a long history of doing stop motion, so I was a little concerned about getting the job done on time and on budget. I had played with a software application, a 2D animation application called Moho. It has rigging built into it, so you can create essentially an armature. They've implemented some of that into Adobe Animate, but it's much better in Moho. And so knowing that Moho had that capability, I knew that if I could build clay puppets, photograph their parts, and then put them together digitally in, say, Photoshop, so they're layered files. And then I could bring that layered file into Moho, create an armature, and then animate within Moho. I get the look and feel of a clay character, but the digital editing and animating ability of digital. So I felt like, gee, if I can just get over the hurdle of seeing if I can actually do this, I think this could be the way to do this job.
Mhm.
And it turned out it worked out pretty well, and I really enjoyed it. So I could combine both the hands-on thing of making a character that feels more organic and have the digital editability. And from that, I'm still kind of developing that as a way of working. So I use that same kind of process for the short that you're talking about, the Midnight Snack one. And that's just a combination of a clay character photographed and then built up digitally, and then using After Effects and so on to composite stuff together.
For the assets that you're bringing into Moho, how are you getting these characters designed and put into Moho?
For the commercial jobs, I'll do a sketch. If it's requires a character, I'll do a sketch and send that through to get approval on just the drawing design. And from there, I'll
fax it to them.
Yeah, yes, I use my antique fax machine, and then I'll just take that as a guide and build the character in clay. And the nice thing about using this process is there's a lot of leeway, both in color and even in size and shape of certain parts that you have. So yes, I built it in clay. I'll photograph all the parts of the character, bring it into Photoshop, knock out the backgrounds, put the character together in Photoshop as a layered file, and then import that into Moho. All the layers come in as layers, and then you have the ability to animate them. And once you build the rig, the skeleton essentially that you're going to animate, it can bend those different parts. So even if you have an arm that's straight across like this in Moho, I have the ability I don't necessarily have to have the hands separate. I can, have a bone coming to the wrist, and then from the wrist to the hand and individual fingers if I need them or whatever. And I can, do all this within Moho. So you have a lot of flexibility. So you don't need, a lot of different parts, and you can add them. The nice thing about, I'm not a Moho fanboy, but I guess I am a little bit, in that it's very stable and very flexible. So the nice thing is you can, and this has tripped me up in other work procedures before, but you can, even after your animation has started or you've built a character and you're animating it, you can bring in a new piece, integrate it into the character, and it doesn't blow up the rig. So you have a lot of ability to add as you go, as you find a need. You can bring things in. So it's really flexible.
Do you have any suggestion, like while people are preparing for the footage, for the shoot, for each part and stuff, is there anything you need to be careful? Like, is it need to be very big pixelation, or what kind of detail, maybe?
Well, I know, I'm given the specs, so I know if it's 1920 by 1080 or something like that. So I always know, and another thing that I try to impart to my students in my classes, you got to know what you're working towards. So as long as I know the size that I'm aiming at, then I can decide if I need to reduce the resolution of different photographs of a character or whatever. And because cameras take such high resolution photographs now, it's always a matter of just deciding how much can I downsize it to make the whole process faster. If you use it at full size, you can have in a 1920 by 1080 stage size, you can have, the eyeball be bigger than the stage. It's really a forgiving way of working.
Yeah, you can redo, you can undo, and then do a lot of experiments again, and don't need to worry about the messiness or recarving things with this program.
What camera are you using to photograph this?
I have a Nikon D5500, which is great camera for my purposes. I do a lot of photography, just landscape photography and stuff, and it works well for that. Shoots pretty good video. So it's come in really handy as my everyday shooter for the stuff that I do. That's, stop motion or this process.
The Moho makes sense now too, because you have a holiday, Christmas time animation where it looks like it's stop mo, but when they're dancing, everything is squashing.
Oh, it's like a jello feel, very, very happy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's another one that G Fuel holiday thing.
Yeah.
I think the one you're talking about. The cans are kind of dancing and stuff.
This is what I was curious about when I was watching it, though, is you have each individual thing moving and animated, but then you have it all squashing as a whole. Did you animate it, then squash the video, or did you how did you squash everything together?
I think the interior thing is just I was able to reuse a bunch of parts of the elves. That thing was supposed to be influenced by Rudolph, the old Rankin Bass thing, which a lot of people have often said, oh yeah, they always say when they want stop motion, and then they refer to Rudolph. So it was one of those kind of things. So anyway, I just did my take on those kind of traditional characters and built puppets reusing a lot of the pieces, and then I animated the individual characters separately in time with a piece of music, and then bring them all together into the final shot. And in Moho you can set up a camera depth, it's like a 3D set, so you can put things farther back. So I guess to answer your question, yes, they're animated separately but brought together, but in sync because of animating to the same piece of music. And then the final exterior shot where these trees are kind of doing this sway thing, that's just, I think, 3 trees that I built out of clay, built a rig that allowed them to do their thing, and then replicated them, throughout the scene.
Well, there's you mainly do rigging. Is there any you use? Is that called mesh?
It's not really a mesh like in After Effects. You can use what do they call them? Those pins, and then when you put a pin in, you see a mesh generated around the artwork. And that's not the case with Moho. To me, it's first of all, the response is a lot faster. I always had a problem with After Effects and doing I can't remember the term of the pins, but it was so slow, or I didn't have a really fast computer or anything. So it just seemed like a really slow, cumbersome process. And in Moho, it's much more direct. You just see essentially a triangular shape indicating it's a bone, and where they meet, that's the joint. There's no mesh around the artwork, so it doesn't visually interfere with anything. And boy, it's super responsive. So it feels like, you're not begging for stuff to happen. It happens.
About the storytelling, I wonder who usually are your test audience, to see if the joke work.
Mostly my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I just throw it out there. A lot of the stuff that I show is not for jobs, so naturally everybody, when they put work out in the public, they want to feel like there's an audience and that the audience appreciates it for some reason. I'm the same way. So I just hope it brings a smile or a laugh or something like that, and move on. That's again, that stuff. The nice thing about doing the stuff that I tend to post on Instagram is that it doesn't like in the old days before all this online stuff. If I was doing a piece, like a personal piece that I thought I might use for my portfolio or something, I'd spend a long time on it, and it was so hard to get it out in a form before online goes. It felt like you invested so much more time into one piece. And now I feel like I'm able to get up in the morning and do some sketch thing and make it move and throw it up. And just the act of putting it up makes it feel like I can move on. I don't have to think about it anymore. It was fun. I don't put stuff up that, I don't like. Again, at least when I was younger and working as an illustrator, after I had gotten out of games and all that stuff, and I was working as a freelance illustrator, it was always real important that you just show your best stuff and don't show stuff that you don't want to do, because you get a client that will hire you for the thing that you hate. So I was always working with that in mind, and having the venue of, in my case, Instagram, to put stuff up. I don't have to take it seriously. I'm not worried about a client seeing something that I just experimented on and they go, hey, I thought he was that, but he's this. I don't care anymore. And actually, I've gotten jobs from stuff that I put up that I wasn't trying to get a job from. I'm going to be dead long before a lot of these other people are. So I'm putting up what I want to put up. So, I've gotten to that stage.
I know. So you are inside your own life, so it's hard to see it from the outside, but like, you have been through it all. So you've also been teaching for 20 years, which means there are probably ripples that have happened in animation that you're unaware of entirely from people you have taught and have gone out there and done stuff.
That's true. Actually, I've been teaching for 30 years, so 33, I think. So yeah, it's a massive change, what's going on. So it's been fun to, see it. I mean, I've only been teaching animation specifically for about 23 years, but prior to that, illustration design. So the changes have been astounding. Naturally, it's like no internet, and all that comes along with it.
Okay, here's two questions for you then. One is, in the 30-something years you've been teaching, what is one thing in particular that has not changed at all that when you teach is like something like this is the exact same fundamental, and what is something that has completely changed?
Well, what has completely changed is just the tools, and I've gone through a periods of time when I feel like, gee, I wish I was a carpenter and I had a hammer that was the same now as it was, 80 years ago. And I worked with this hammer, and that's what I do. Having to learn new tools, and sometimes it's like I've forgotten way more than, I remember about all these different tools. But on the other hand, it keeps it interesting and exciting. So that's changed. What's stayed the same is knowing how to create a composition. Mm-hmm. That's the same as it was in, 1474 and before. Knowing how, a picture plane works and how to divide it and how to draw attention to this or that. It's always the same. It's one of the things I like about doing photography is I feel like it's a rapid fire practice in composition. Again, repetitive compositions or composing images, whether it's photography or drawings or paintings or whatever, it all feeds into whatever it is in your head that, learns composition and how to create a composition to the point where you don't have to think about, I need to create a composition. Maybe I should do it in thirds. Maybe, this or that or the other thing. You don't have to think about it so much. It's in there and it just kind of comes out.
But animation used to be a very different screen format than it is now. Were you animating then?
Yeah, I started doing animation for clients in kind of I think around 95 or 96 when Flash, which originally was Future Splash, I started using it when it was Future Splash. Mm-hmm. So I had actually started using Macromind Director before that, but only for a couple of jobs. And so, yes, to answer your question, yes, I was, doing work before 16:9 became, the standard, and it was 4:3. And all tubes were cathode ray tubes,
What was that change like for you in your experience of animation from having the more area to cover?
I loved it. All of a sudden, going to 16:9 just felt cinematic, or much closer to it. Just in terms of 2D design, if you've ever been in a 2D design class or you've taught one, squares are pretty boring, as a format. I love, elongated rectangles. I think that Acme delivery piece originally was even a more cinematic, wider screen format. I just find that format much more fun than a 4x3.
Oh, that made me want to mention again of the animation wildcard, that midnight snack. Like, I like how you play with the space. It's also like have a shape joke, but how you even the credit and stuff, the composition in that film, I enjoy it. So
Well,
yeah.
I'm glad you like it. Again, it just felt kind of natural the way it came out. So I'm glad you can appreciate, the design.
The lighting. So the animation wildcard short was in Moho?
That's that same process where it was a clay character that I brought in and put together, composed within Moho, and then animated it within Moho.
Well, what's the lighting like? Because that's a nighttime kind of shot in the kitchen, and then a fridge opens up and you have the fridge bright. How does that work for shading and lighting in Moho?
That in particular was the rim light on the character when he opens the fridge door. So it feels like there's light that's hitting him at that point. That was just using kind of a light texture that was clipped to the character itself. So, for anybody that's familiar with Photoshop or After Effects, it's like using a clipping mask so that rim light stays there. And so that looks like lighting. When I finish animating in Moho, I output all of the layers separately. So they're output as a series of PNG images with alpha. So they're transparent around it.
Huh.
So then I can composite in After Effects. So that light on the background that happens behind the character as the door opens up, that's just a mask in After Effects where I brightened that section of the background behind the character. So taken together between the rim light on the character that pops up and the background lightening up, it gives a sense of, light, but it's totally fake.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. A really flexible way of working.
Before we go, anything you want to promote about yourself or your work or what you're working on and your Instagram handles, since you are on Instagram?
Just, if you're interested in my work, Instagram is a good place to see it because I post most everything there. And my handle is Dave.Joly.
Joly.
1L. Yep.
The previous question from our last guest, Steffi Gann, is
I'm wondering how you recharge or what do you do for self-care?
Oh, well, we have a terrific YMCA in my town, and my wife and I have been members there since it opened. So we go there a lot of, probably 3 or 4 times a week. And I ride on days that I don't do that. I ride my bike, at least, when it's not winter, my bicycle. So I do a lot of biking.
I'm surprised that at no point were bees part of that answer.
Well, yeah, I didn't even think of that, but that's true too. I find beekeeping, that's something I picked up, I think about 13 years ago. And it's just totally fascinating to see what they do. I mean, the honey is nice, but I don't sell it. I give a lot away to friends and family, but just seeing how they organize things and, it's a whole different world. I find that totally fascinating. And there is actually nothing that relieves stress like going out and sitting next to the hive and smelling it, which is incredible in the summer, and just listening and watching them do their thing.
What is one of the most surprisingly least known things about beekeeping?
Well, actually, for the most part, once you gain confidence, again, it's a confidence game, you can work around them and with them and really not be stung that much. I mean, you do get stung once in a while. I mean, some people you see, fully.
Yeah, armor.
Yeah, and I do wear a jacket and a veil, mostly for the veil, because getting stung in the face you just don't want to get stung in the face.
No.
But I don't wear gloves. A lot of people don't wear gloves. Some people don't wear any veil or anything. And it's not like they won't sting you, but when you learn how to be around them, they're not interested in stinging you unless they perceive you as a threat. Sometimes, you'll just do something wrong and they'll let you know. But a bee dies when it stings you. So it's a last gasp effort on their part to protect the hive. Once you're familiar and comfortable, you don't get stung that often, unless you have a colony that is inclined to be really defensive. And in that case, you have to requeen it. Yeah. Because they get their genetics from the queen. If the queen has ornery genetics, the whole 50,000 bees in the colony are going to be ornery. So in that case, you might get stung more.
Well, from what you say, like be more confident and be comfortable, like about the stung thing. I don't know. That statement feel like an artist life situation too. Kind of
Yeah.
you.
I was thinking that as I was saying it. Thought, oh man, this hooks up with that thing that I said a long time ago. Yeah. It's a confidence racket. Yep.
Now it's the time to end the show, which we don't want to do. So we give the honor to you, the guest. How would you like to end the episode?
Well, I in my classes for the last bunch of years, I found that my students tend to be late teenage years or early 20s for the most part, and I found that most of them don't have a lot of experience in knowing how to deal with money, and particularly in terms of applying to college. And in the U.S., the cost of college is incredible. So I decided to take one class a semester, and I put together kind of a presentation about what I thought were the important points to know about money and how money works as the basics, so that they'll be a little more confident and know before they step into the trap of massive college loans. And this isn't, the presentation that I put together isn't just about college, but it was focused because of where they were mostly heading. Try to give them enough ammunition to fire back when someone suggests something that is going to have a huge impact on their life for decades to come. Because at that age, you just don't know. That presentation is the thing that I thought might offer someone who's watching this an opportunity either for them to learn some of this stuff, or maybe if they know someone, they can download this presentation as well. And it has all links to what I think are important topics.
Yes, you can find all those valuable informations and links in the description. So very thanks, Dave, for generously share this. This is very important.
First, thank you, Dave, so much for joining us. And without further ado, we present Dave's Money Minute.
Money Minute.
Back in 2016, I read a story in the Atlantic magazine about a writer who described being in pretty desperate straits financially. And it was a very interesting story, and I realized that to make it as an artist, it's really helpful to understand how money works and how credit works and how student loans work. If you have a basic understanding of how the world of money works, you can make it work for you rather than feel like it's using you. So anyway, after reading that story, I decided that it would be really helpful to some of my classes if I presented some of this basic information, because I had a strong feeling that they, for the most part, don't have a lot of exposure to a lot of this type of information. It certainly wasn't on my radar back when I was that age. It can be hard to come by, and it's very important to get it as early as possible, especially if you're going on to college and you're finding yourself having to take on what, at least in the U.S., are really massive loans that will affect how you live for decades to come. So anyway, I started compiling a list of articles and things that I thought would be helpful. The result of that is here on this note that I've put together with links, and it covers basic stuff, generally how to set yourself up early on in your life to make the most of any opportunity that comes your way. So hopefully this might be helpful to you or maybe someone you know. It's certainly not just aimed at students, but anyone who wants a kind of a grounding in the basics of money and how it works and how you can make it work for you. So take a look. Hope it helps.
Yeah.